There is a strange sickness in the modern spirit, a frantic need to be filled. We call it busy, we call it connected, we call it informed. But beneath the labels is the same hunger. Noise. Not only the noise of streets and screens, but the subtler roar inside the skull. Unfinished lives, borrowed opinions, the invisible audience we keep performing for. Tonight, we speak about the one medicine our age refuses to swallow. Deliberate silence. Not silence as emptiness, but silence as contact. The moment the inner world finally becomes audible. In an old desert tale, a seeker crossed salt plains to reach a reclusive master. He knocked. A voice asked, "Who stands there?" The seeker said, "It is me." The door stayed shut. "Two cannot live in this chamber," the voice replied. "Return when you are not crowded with yourself." So the seeker walked back into the wind, not to escape the world, but to meet what the world keeps him from hearing. For many nights he sat, unmoving, until his own name began to feel like a costume. When the seeker returned, he knocked again. The same voice asked, "Who is there?" This time he did not speak his title, his achievements, or his wounds. He whispered, "It is you." And the door opened, not because the master wanted obedience, but because the mask had finally burned away. This is the first operation in inner alchemy, calcination. The slow burning of the false personality until only what is essential remains. In the Hermetic tradition, fire is not punishment. It is revelation. It consumes what cannot survive the truth. A century ago, a Swiss depth mapper named Dr. Elias Brenner described the same process in psychological language. He called it the return to the whole, not becoming better, but becoming undivided. Yet Brenner issued a warning. No one reaches wholeness through comfort. The descent requires dissent. Against the crowd, against the inherited script, against the inner tyrant that shouts produce, perform, prove. The ancient Gnostics had a name for this tyranny. The wardens, mechanical rulers of attention who feed on distraction. They do not chain the body, they fracture the mind, and when the mind is fractured, the soul cannot speak. The mystics of the Old East spoke of a hidden faculty within the human being, something deeper than thought, deeper even than emotion. They called it the inner heart, the organ of direct knowing, not the sentimental heart of romance, but a spiritual instrument, like a compass buried under layers of iron. They taught that the heart is a mirror, and a mirror does not lose its nature when it becomes dirty. It only stops reflecting. The dust that gathers is subtle. Obsession with approval, the constant measuring of the self, the endless commentary running beneath your day. You do not notice the dust because it feels like you. But it is not you. It is accumulation. So they developed a discipline, not merely meditation, but polishing, a deliberate reduction of inputs, less speech, less stimulation, less explanation. And in that reduction, something begins to appear, at first faintly, like a star behind cloud. Brenner wrote that modern suffering is often the psyche's protest against exile. Anxiety is the mind trapped in the future. Depression is the soul refusing to participate in a life that is not real. These are not simply malfunctions to silence with entertainment or chemicals. They are signals. The question is whether you will interpret them as enemies or as emissaries. Because the moment you begin to remove noise, you discover an uncomfortable truth. Silence does not feel peaceful at first. It feels like withdrawal. The mind panics when it cannot feed. And that panic is the gate. There is a saying among the initiates: the first thing you meet in silence is not God. It is yourself, and most people cannot bear that meeting. They sit down, the room goes quiet, and suddenly the mind begins throwing images like sparks from a grinding wheel. Old humiliations, jealousies, desires, grief. The nervous system demands movement, distraction, relief. This is not failure. This is the beginning of the work. In one story, a young jurist arrived at the door of an elder known for his wisdom. The student carried scrolls of law, cosmology, sacred commentary, his arms full of certainty. "Master," he said, "I have spent my life studying what is true. Tell me what I still lack." The elder looked at him gently and replied, "You lack the courage to be empty. Go sit in the center of the city until your knowledge becomes ash." That is an offensive instruction to the modern mind. We believe the cure is more information, more strategy, more content. But inner alchemy moves the other way, toward subtraction, toward the destruction of what you thought you were. Brenner called this the encounter with the shadow, not evil, but the unlived life. Everything you rejected to remain acceptable, every impulse you buried to be praised. Your shadow is not your enemy. It is your amputated strength, and silence is the blade that cuts through self-deception. It reveals what your personality has been hiding from you, often for decades. Some traditions insisted that the confrontation must be long enough to break the mind's rebellion. That is why you see the same number repeating across cultures: 40 days. 40 as a symbolic threshold, long enough for the persona to weaken, long enough for buried material to rise, long enough for the inner theater to reveal its actors. The initiates practiced retreat in darkness. Not because darkness is holy, but because it strips away performance. No one can maintain an image when there is no audience, not even an imagined one. In the absence of distraction, the psyche begins to speak in its native language: sensation, dream, symbol, impulse. Brenner described his own descent as though a trapdoor opened beneath him. He found himself facing figures that were not imaginary in the childish sense, but autonomous presences: fear with a voice, grief with a face, ambition wearing the mask of righteousness. He called the method active dialogue, not suppressing these forces, not worshiping them, but listening until their hidden purpose is revealed. And this is the first breakthrough. You discover that the mind's noise is often protection. The distraction is not random. It is defense. It is the guard dog of the ego. It keeps you from entering the rooms where pain is stored. So when the chatter intensifies, do not assume you are regressing. Assume you are near the threshold. The psyche only fights this hard when something vital is close. Then, if you persist without flinching, the noise begins to thin. Beneath thought, a stillness appears, quiet, heavy, unmistakably alive. The Gnostics taught that the human mind is not a single voice, but a council. And much of what we call me thoughts are not truly ours. They are installed. In their language, these forces were the rulers, patterns of compulsion, hunger, shame, and restless craving that govern a person from behind the eyes. Today we would call them algorithms of habit, internalized authority, inherited fear. Different names, same prison. The rulers do not need chains. They only need your attention, because attention is worship. Whatever you stare at long enough becomes your God. So here is a simple practice, part psychological, part hermetic, designed to reclaim the inner throne. Once a day, Choose 10 minutes where you do nothing productive. No music, no screen, no reading. Sit upright, eyes half closed. Place one hand on the chest, as if reminding the body you have returned. Then do one thing only. Notice the impulse to escape, the itch to check, the urge to move. The mind will offer excuses disguised as urgency. Do not argue. Just witness. In this witnessing, you are doing something radical. You are no longer possessed by the impulse. You are observing it. And when you can observe a force, it begins to lose its power. The rulers weaken when they are seen. Once the noise quiets, the psyche does not suddenly start speaking in clean sentences. It speaks the way it always has, through symbols, images, dreams, sudden fascinations, strange repetitions, a song you cannot stop hearing, a phrase that keeps returning, a pull toward a place you do not logically understand. This is where many people fail. They demand literal answers from a symbolic intelligence. But the soul is older than logic. It does not deliver spreadsheets, it delivers myth. A parable tells of a prophet who encountered a shepherd praying in the wilderness. The shepherd spoke to the divine, as though speaking to a beloved friend. If you were here, I would wash your feet. I would bring you food. I would comb your hair. The prophet, scandalized, rebuked him. You speak nonsense. The holy cannot be described like this. The shepherd fell silent in shame and walked away. That night, the prophet received a vision. Why did you wound the one who loves me? I do not measure the words. I measure the fire. The meaning is surgical. The inner world speaks in the dialect of the individual. What matters is sincerity, not correctness. Brenner saw the same reality in his studies of archetypes. The psyche produces recurring patterns: the shadow, the wise guide, the abyss, the child, the serpent, not as fiction, but as structures of transformation. You do not invent them, you encounter them, and they surface most clearly when the outer world grows quiet. Here is the part most people never learn. A symbol is not something you merely interpret. It is something you enter into relationship with. The mistake is to treat the inner world like a code to crack. The correct approach is closer to diplomacy. If an image rises in silence, a ruined temple, a black river, a faceless figure, do not dismiss it as random. Treat it as a message written in the psyche's own alphabet. Then do something very simple. Address it. Ask quietly, inside, what are you? Then, what do you want from me? Then, what are you protecting me from? And after each question, do not fill the silence with your intellect. Wait. The response may arrive as words, but often it arrives as a bodily shift. The throat tightens, the stomach drops, the chest warms. That sensation is language. Your nervous system is the parchment the unconscious writes upon. This method is not fantasy. It is psychological integration. When you allow a hidden part to speak without punishment, it stops screaming through symptoms. A person might discover their anxiety is not irrational, but a guardian keeping them from repeating an old betrayal. Another might realize their depression is a refusal to participate in a life built to please others. The symbol is not there to entertain you. It is there to correct your direction. Silence is not relaxation. Silence is navigation. Every initiatory path reaches the same checkpoint. The moment you realize the self you have been defending is mostly scaffolding. In alchemy, this is called dissolution. the washing away of fixed identity so the deeper substance can emerge. The old Gnostic teachers described it as escaping the rulers by awakening the hidden spark, the light buried under personality. They taught that the prison is not the world itself, but the false center through which you experience it. When that false center collapses, something shocking happens. You do not disappear. You become real. There is an initiation myth from the coastlands of the East. A circle of seekers traveled to find the living king, the one they believed would grant them freedom. After years, they reached a silent sanctuary carved into stone. Inside was no throne, only a chamber lined with polished metal. The seekers stepped forward, confused. Then they saw it. Every wall reflected them back, but not as they wished to appear, only as they were. And in that humiliation came the revelation. The king was not outside. The king was the awareness looking through their eyes. This is the meaning of the inner Nazarene teaching. The kingdom is within. Not poetry, mechanics. Liberation begins when the mask falls quiet enough for the witness to speak. But there is a danger here. Silence does not automatically reveal truth. It reveals voices. And not every voice in the inner world is the soul. Some voices are parasites wearing sacred clothing. Brenner warned about the inner tribunal, the installed judge that speaks in absolutes. You must. You should. You behind. You failing. It borrows the tone of parents, teachers, rivals, even spiritual authorities. It often pretends to be virtue, but its fruit is exhaustion. The mystics made the same distinction. They spoke of a blaming self that accuses without healing. It does not invite transformation. It demands punishment. That voice thrives on pressure. It tightens the chest. It creates urgency. It turns life into a courtroom. The voice of the soul feels different. It is quiet. It does not argue. It does not threaten an abandonment, even when it asks for something terrifying, ending a relationship, leaving a career, facing grief. It carries an undertone of relief, a strange spaciousness. It opens the lungs. Here is the test. When you hear an inner instruction, ask, does this expand me or compress me? The tribunal compresses, the soul expands. The tribunal shames, the soul clarifies. The tribunal says now or else. The soul says when you are ready, I am here. Discernment is the difference between awakening and another form of slavery. There is a practice older than most religions and newer than most self-help. Witnessing, not fixing the mind, not fighting it, seeing it. Sit in silence and watch thoughts arrive like strangers at a gate. One carries shame. One carries ambition. One carries lust. One carries dread. The mistake is to invite them all inside and let them run the house. The work is to remain at the gate, simply noticing. This is a thought, not a commandment. At first, this feels powerless. The mind protests. It insists that every thought is urgent, that every emotion is an emergency. But with repetition, a separation appears, subtle but decisive. You begin to recognize that you are not the storm. You are the sky. In daily life, this becomes revolutionary. Someone insults you, and anger rises, yet you witness it instead of obeying it. You feel the impulse to scroll, to numb, to eat without hunger, yet you see it as a wave passing through. And because you see it, you gain a choice. This is what breaks paradigms, not new ideology, not better arguments. The ability to perceive the mechanism before it captures you. The rulers survive by automation. Witnessing restores authorship. Brenner believed this was the hidden center of individuation. Not building a stronger ego, but relocating the ego into service. The personality becomes a tool, not a prison. And the soul finally gains a channel into your actions, not just your dreams. Alchemy is not about escaping suffering. It is about transmuting it. The old formula was solve et cogila, dissolve and recombine. First, the rigid structure breaks down. Then a new structure forms, stronger because it is honest. This is why anxiety often rises when you begin inner work. Anxiety is the sentinel of the false self. It appears whenever the ego senses a loss of control. The common response is to treat anxiety as an intruder. Distract it, sedate it, drown it in work. But the alchemical response is different. You ask, what are you guarding? Try this. When anxiety enters, do not run. Let it fully arrive in the body. Feel its texture. Is it hot, tight, sharp? Where does it sit? Then ask it one question. What truth are you preventing me from touching? Often, behind anxiety, there is a younger part of you frozen in an old moment. Rejection, humiliation, abandonment. Anxiety is not only fear of the future. It is fear of re-entering the past. When you sit with it without resistance, it changes shape. It becomes grief, or anger, or clarity. And that shift is coagulation. The energy that was bound in symptoms returns as power. This is why the mystics said the heart must break open. Not because life is cruel, but because the defended heart cannot receive reality. Only the opened heart can hold both pain and meaning without collapse. Now we make this usable. Because wisdom that cannot be practiced becomes decoration. Here is a nightly ritual that blends the psychological and the hermetic, simple enough to do in ordinary life, strong enough to rewire it. Step 1. Silence. 10 minutes. No input. Sit and witness the mind until the surface begins to settle. Step 2. Symbol. Ask inwardly, what is the image that represents my life right now? Do not invent something clever. Wait, an image will arise. A locked room, a burning bridge, a staircase, an ocean. Step 3. Dialogue. Ask the image, what do you want me to change? Then listen for the response, not only in words but in feeling. Step 4. Action. Choose one small act for tomorrow that honors what you heard. Something real. A boundary. A conversation. A refusal. A beginning. This last step is essential. Without it, inner work becomes fantasy. The soul speaks for the sake of embodiment. But there is a warning. Silence can produce inflation, spiritual ego masquerading as revelation. If the inner voice tells you you are chosen, superior, exempt from human limits, treat it as contamination. True guidance is never grandiose. It is precise. It makes you humbler, cleaner, more responsible. The goal is not to become mystical. The goal is to become undivided. So your life stops leaking energy into performance and begins moving with quiet authority. The inner journey does not end in withdrawal. Every real initiation requires return. Otherwise, it becomes another escape, just dressed in sacred language. The hermit must come back to the city with something that can live in daylight. There is a story of an old practitioner who vanished for years into fasting and solitude. When he returned, his students expected thunder, visions, miracles, supernatural calm. Instead, they saw him bargaining over vegetables, laughing at a rude merchant carrying water home. The student, offended, asked, "After all those years, you still care about prices?" The elder answered, "Before the awakening, carry water. After the awakening, carry water. The difference is that now I am here while I do it." That is integration. Not perfection, presence. You still work. You still love. You still suffer. But you are no longer hypnotized by the role you play. The ego becomes functional, not tyrannical. Brenner described the integrated person as someone who has made peace with their contradictions. They no longer split themselves into spiritual and worldly, pure and corrupted. They have met their shadow without collapsing into it. They have made a relationship with the unconscious instead of letting it sabotage them from below. This is the gold of inner alchemy. Not a magical life, but a coherent one. A life where depression becomes a call to depth, anxiety becomes a call to honesty, and loneliness becomes a doorway to the beloved within, and silence remains the crucible, because without it, the old rulers quietly return. We live in an age of noise because silence threatens the empire inside us. Silence reveals the grief we postponed, the rage we swallowed, the desires we betrayed, the life we keep delaying in exchange for safety. And the greatest fear beneath all fears is simple, that if we stop performing, we will discover there is nothing underneath. But the ancient teachers, mystics, psychologists, heretics, say the opposite. Beneath the mask is not emptiness. Beneath the mask is the real center. Vast, luminous, frightening, and alive. The part of you that existed before you learned to beg for approval. The spark the rulers could never manufacture, only distract you from. The voice of the soul rarely shouts. It does not argue. It waits. It waits behind your habits, behind your consumption, behind your explanations. It waits for the moment you finally become quiet enough to hear it. So take this as an instruction, not a metaphor. Cut one thread of distraction. Sit down in the dark and listen long enough for the false self to lose its grip. Because somewhere inside you, there is a voice that does not use words. It has been speaking your entire life. The question is not whether it exists. The question is whether you have the courage to meet it. The inner door is already open. The only thing left is your decision to enter.